Namaskar, this is Rig. Welcome to episode 7 of the Dharma series. And today our topic of discussion is Brahmacharya, which means studenthood. In our last episode, we have done an introduction regarding the four stages of human life according to the Vedic culture. So today we are going to delve deep into the first stage, that is Brahmacharya, which is also called the student phase of a man's life. We are going to discuss in detail about this stage. I apologize in advance for the mistakes I will make in pronunciations because Sanskrit, when translated to English, is very difficult to pronounce. So let's start with introduction to brahmacharya. Here we will know what are the things we will discuss in this episode. So this is basically a summary of all the things which we will discuss in detail. Meaning of brahmacharya. Brahmacharya refers to the stage of life dedicated to studenthood, discipline and Vedic learning. So this stage refers to the formation years of a man's life, with a man being a student under a guru and learning Vedic principles and discipline. It was compulsory for the three upper varnas and emphasized celibacy. So this brahmacharya was not to be skipped by anyone. This stage was the foundation stage which was compulsory for the three upper classes, that is brahmanas, kshatriyas and vaishyas. And what are the rules you should follow while being on this stage? You should follow celibacy, obedience, and spiritual as well as intellectual training. It was not only based on studies, it was on spiritual and intellectual training as well. Sources of knowledge. From where do we get information about this stage of human life? The concept is detailed in Ṛgveda, Atharvaveda, Chandogya Upanishad, Ashvalayana Grihasutra, Bhalladharanyaka Upanishad, Attareya Brahmana, Mahabharata, Harivamsha, and Smritis. So, all these texts provide a lot of information regarding the first stage of a man's life or the studenthood, the principles you should follow in studenthood, that is Brahmacharya. Duties and lifestyle. Students or brahmacharins live with teachers, performed menial tasks, studied scriptures, and followed strict codes of dress, diet, and conduct, all varying by Varna. So, different classes of students used to live together in the house of the Guru, which was called the ashram, and they performed not only duties related to education, but they performed all the basic functions of life. That is, they performed the basic tasks in life like cooking, cleaning, all these things. They studied scriptures and also followed a uniform code, that is a dress code, a diet code and conduct. Duration of studies. Text mentions studenthood of 12, 24, 32, or even 48 years with memorization of Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads being the focus. So there were different types of courses which the students completed during Brahmacharya. And some of these courses took 12 years, some took 24 years, 32, and some even took 48 years. And what are the things they studied? They studied with the memorization of Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. So these are the chief texts of ancient cultures which were studied by the students during the phase of Brahmacharya. Varna distinctions. Ages for initiation means the beginning of brahmacharya. Dress codes and staff lengths differed for Brahmana, Kshatriya, and Vaishya students, reflecting social hierarchies. So, when the caste system became very much rigid, that time there was distinction between the students in the house of the Guru. Thus, we get a reflection that there was differences in social hierarchies. Princes like Krishna and Balaram studied under teachers like Sandipani. Special schools existed for Vedic and practical education, sometimes tailored for Vaishyas. So there were specialized educations for the royal families or for the uplifted caste, and sometimes there was special school for the Vaishyas class also, means for the people who used to involve themselves in trade and commercial activities. The period ended with Samāvartana ceremony, after which the student became a snātak, eligible to return home, marry or continue under the teacher. So there was end of studenthood with the Samāvartana ceremony, where the student used to get the degree and they could choose what to do with the rest of their lives. So that was the introduction to Brahmacharya. Now we will see what are the concept and duties of a brahmacharya. What are the things which he should do and how did the concept of this first stage of human life develop? Brahmacharya refers to the period of studenthood obligatory for the youths of the three upper castes. So this phase was in no way to be skipped by the three upper castes, that is Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas. So it was compulsory period of studenthood for the three upper classes. During this stage, a student studied the Vedas, practiced continence and celibacy, and lived with his teacher until the studies were complete. So, a student was not supposed to be educated in a home. Neither it was a modern school type education. Here it was like a boarding school, a very strict boarding school where the students had to obey everything that the teacher said, and he or she was not allowed to return home until the education was complete. So, for a period of decades, the students used to live with the teacher. Brahmacharin in Vedic literature. The word brahmacharin occurs in Ṛgveda and Atharvaveda, indicating its Vedic origin. So, the Vedic origin of this system has been established when the word called brahmacharin occurs in Ṛgveda and Atharvaveda. The Chandogya Upanishad describes duties like fuel collection, begging, tending sacrificial fires, and practicing penance. So in Chandogya Upanishad, we get mentions of a few duties like fuel collection. Fuel collection here refers to collecting of woods for fuel, and the students were also subjected to begging. They had to go over or supervise the sacrificial fires, means they had to practice spiritual rituals, and then they had to practice penance, means so that they become accustomed to the hardships of life. So brahmacārin in Vedic literature is a common term, however the duties have been written in Chandogya Upanishad. Students attire and discipline. So what are the things the students are supposed to do and how will they dress up? So the Ashvalayana Griha Sutra instructed the brahmacharin to wear an antelope skin. So it was the uniform that the students were supposed to wear, skin made out of deer. So a deer skin or an antelope skin was the dress of the student. They were supposed to eat water. Eat water means you may think that water is supposed to be drunk. Why am I writing eat water? So it is because sometimes water was the only substance of consumption available to them, and so they were sometimes supposed only to eat water, sleep not in daytime, perform duties, and be obedient. They were supposed to be awake during the daytime. They were instructed to perform duties, and always they would have to be obedient, means without question they would have to do whatever the teachers said. The Valladharanyaka Upanishad calls him Antevasin. So Antevasin is the term given to a brahmacharin who follows all the disciplines and duties prescribed in the phase of brahmacharya. Relation with the teacher. The student after investiture with sacred thread means after the initiation the student was initiated to a new life. So this was a new life which began with the investiture ceremony where a student was tied a sacred thread, living at the teacher's house under strict discipline. So the student was supposed to live under the teacher's house under strict discipline and guidance. On finishing education, the student returned home and then could become a householder. So, a student could proceed into the next stage only after the completion of brahmacharya. So, on finishing education, the student was allowed to return home and continue with his household life. Duration and practices of studenthood. So, what was the duration and what are the things which the students practiced in this phase? The Aitareya Aranyaka and the Chandogya Upanishad mention guarding the teacher's cattle. So the student was also supposed to do household tasks like guarding teacher's cattle, and that has been referred to in the Aitareya and Chandogya Upanishad. Obedience to the teacher and study of the Veda were paramount. So the only thing which was totally focused was the students' obedience to the teacher and learning of Veda. This was the final thing which cannot be compromised with. Length of study period. The Chandogya Upanishad prescribes 12 years of studenthood. So 12 years of studenthood have been prescribed in the Chandogya Upanishad, where for 12 years the student was supposed to study in the ashram of the Guru. Later it fixes the age from 12 to 14. So later the phase of studenthood have been increased to 14. Another verse speaks 32 years of studenthood. It may have depended on what kind of studies you are doing in the ashram. Extended theories. Later traditions required 12 years for each Veda and 48 years for mastering four Vedas. So there was 12 years for each Veda and 48 years. So 12 into 4 is 48. So 48 years were required to master the four Vedas. This became the common view. So that was the extended theory of the duration of studenthood, where the student needed to study each Veda for a period of 12 years, totaling up to 48 years. Method of Vedic learning. Learning involved memorization of the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and principal Upanishads which were in prose. So, what are the things which the student learned? The first thing was learning of the Vedas, and then came Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and the main Upanishads. Most of these Upanishads, or the most of the principal Upanishads, were written in prose structure. Decline of Vedic study. Over time, Kshatriya and Vaishya students studied less, leaving the Vedic monopoly largely to the Brahmanas. So, with the passage of time, the Kshatriya and Vaishya students declined in their study of Vedas, and thus Vedic monopoly was solely reserved to the Brahmanas. Role of Shrauta sacrifice. Vedic learning was necessary for the priests in sacrifices, particularly requiring Brahmana students. So, Vedic study was very much required for the priests because they had to perform sacrificial rituals, and those required Brahmana students. Now we will see how the studenthood varied according to the different varnas. We all know that four varnas are there typically, that is Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras. If you want to know more about the caste systems, please go through the first 5 episodes of the Dharma series. So what were the Varna-based distinctions in studenthood? The proper ages for initiation were 8th year of Brahmana, 11th year for Kshatriya, and 12th for Vaishya. So we all know that the stage of Brahmacharya was compulsory for the upper three castes. However, the initiation time varied. So proper ages for initiation was 8th year for Brahmana. So in the Brahmana caste, if a child is 8 year old, he will be eligible for the studenthood phase. For the Kshatriyas, it was 11 years, and for the Vaishya, it was 12 years. Upper age limits for initiation. The upper limits of for Upanayana were 16th year for Brahmana. So within 8th to 16th year, a Brahmin must be initiated into the stage of studenthood or Brahmacharya. So the range to get into the ashram of Guru was from 8th to 16th year for Brahmana. For the Kshatriya, it was 22nd year, means from 11 to 22nd age, a Kshatriya was supposed to be initiated into the fold of studenthood. And for Vaishya, a student, if he crosses 24th year, then will not be permitted to enter into the Brahmacharya ashram. That is, the range for Vaishya was 12 to 24th year. Within these years, a student had to get initiated into the Brahmacharya phase. Costume rules. A Brahmana brahmacharin wore an upper garment uttariya of black antelope skin and hempen cloth undergarment. So there were differences in costumes or differences in uniforms also according to caste. So a Brahmana used to wear upper garment which was made out of black antelope skin, and the lower garment was made out of hempen cloth. The Kshatriya student wore upper garments of Ruru deer skin and undergarment of kasuma, kasuma, which means linen or silk. So undergarment was of silk and upper garment used to consist of deer skin. The Vaishya wore an upper garment of goat's wool and lower garment of sheep's wool. So that was the differences in social hierarchy according to which uniforms were designated to the students of different castes. So Vaishya wore upper garment of goat's wool and lower garment of sheep's wool. You can see a disintegration, a decline as we move forward into the lower castes, decline in the status of uniform. Staff, which is dand. All students carried staffs, the length and material depending on their varna. So students carried staffs, and the length of the staffs, the material with which the staffs were made out of, varied according to the caste of the students. Other Varna distinction. Duties, attire, and lifestyle of students varied significantly across the three Varnas. So, everything what the students were supposed to do varied according to the three Varnas. Royal and scholarly traditions. So, how were the royals distinguished according to their education? What different education did they receive? Right to brahmacharya. All three upper varnas had the right to practice brahmacharya and study Veda, but very few Kshatriyas submitted their sons to its strict discipline. So, even though everyone practiced brahmacharya, all the upper three varnas practiced brahmacharya, but actual strict discipline was practiced by very few Kshatriyas. So, their discipline was rigorous and their education was supreme. References in epics: Mahabharata, Shanti Parvan chapter 79 and Kadambari mention princes being taught in specially constructed houses where teachers were paid handsomely to train them. In Mahabharata, if you see, all the Pandava and Kaurava princes were sent to the ashram of Dronacharya, which was totally sponsored by the Hastinapur kingdom. So Mahabharata and Kadambari states that special houses were constructed for the princes, for the education of the prince and the royal family members, and the teachers or the gurus were paid handsomely in order to train, so that they face no obstruction to train the royal members of the family. Example of Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma. The Harivamsha states that Kṛṣṇa and Balaram left Mathura to study under Sandipani, a native of Varanasi who lived at Avanti in Ujjain. So this is an instance where we find that special treatments or special education was given to the members of the royal family. And here in Harivamsha, it is stated that Krishna and Balaram left Mathura to study under Sandipani, who was a native at Varanasi and lived at Abanti. So curriculum under Sandipani. The princess learned the entire Veda and its Angas as well as Dhanurveda, manual of archery. So they were not only involved in studies, they learned the entire Veda along with its extended texts like the Angas, and they also practiced Dhanurvidya, which means how to become a good archer. So they were trained in warfare techniques also. Education under Kharvel. For Kharvel's time, schools existed teaching Ṛgveda and Nagar, Kamada, Tigula in Tamil and Arya in Marathi. These were likely aimed at Vaishya students. So Kharvel was the king of Orissa in 1st century AD. So he was a very powerful and popular king. And from his sources, we get to know that separate schools existed based on the tradition of Brahmacharya. And what they used to teach? They used to teach Rigveda, Nagara, and Kamada. So these were texts which were taught to the students during the time of Kharvel. And then there were specialized texts like Tigula and Arya, which were for the Vaishya students. So thus we get a continuation evidence of Brahmacharya even during the ages after Christ. Completion of studies and Samāvartana. So, how did the study complete and what was Samāvartana? So, special teachers for princes. Historical accounts suggest that teachers often catered to special educational needs of princes, highlighting their separate arrangements from common students. So, there were specialized system of education for the members of royal family, and that has been evidenced mainly in the epics and Kadambara. So, Samavartan ceremony. The conclusion of studenthood was marked by the Samavartan ceremony, whose essence was a ceremonial bath. So, Samavartan ceremony is the ceremony where students completed their education in the Brahmacharya ashram. The translation of Samavartan in modern day can be said to be the word convocation. So, this convocation ceremony involved a ceremonial bath status of Snatak. After this ceremony, the Brahmacharin was called a Snatak, means one who got the degree. So, one who completed study. So, it was like obtaining the degree of graduation or post graduation. So, a Brahmacharin means a student was called a Snatak after he passed out from the Vedic school. He could return home, marry, and settle down as a householder. So, this person could return home, he could marry, and also he could settle down as a householder. Whatever he wanted or whatever according to societal norms could be done was done by a student who completed Snatak. Option of continued stay. Some Snataks chose to remain with their teachers, continuing their disciplined life. So, some Snataks chose to stay in the ashram itself and help the teacher and along with continuation of the disciplined life. Rule for the Snataks. Gautama specifies that these rules were not primarily for Brahmana and Kshatriya Snataks. Vaishyas were not obliged to observe them. So these rules were for Brahmanas and Kshatriya Snataks only. These rules were not for the Vaishyas to oblige. So Gautama says that special importance were given to the Brahmanas and Kshatriya students. Means the education was more strict for the upper two Varnas, and Vaishyas were not obliged to follow those rules. Conduct of a Snatak. Elaborate rules guided the behavior, discipline, and duties of Snataks, ensuring proper transition from student to householders. So, there were rules and code of conduct given to the Snatakas, means who passed out from the Vedic school, and they had to follow proper guidelines based on discipline. Thus, one could properly transition from being a student to being a householder or from brahmacharya to grihastha. Sources. Now we will go through the sources so that you can verify all the information and also provide me with some more interesting facts. I will just read out the sources because I have already discussed what has been written in them. So the Ṛgveda and Atharvaveda preserve the earliest mentions of brahmacarin, praising the discipline of studenthood during the Vedic period. The Chandogya Upanishad provides detailed references to the duties, duration of study, and rules of discipline, while the Balladharnika Upanishad also describes the student's role. Grihasutras and Aranyakas. The Ashvalayana Grihasutra prescribes dress, conduct, and discipline, while the Aitariya Aranyaka highlights duties like cattle guarding. Dharmasūtras and Smritis. Manu and Gautama lay down age, dress codes, and rules for Brahmacarins and Snatakas for showing Varna-based distinctions. Epic traditions. The Mahabharata and Harivamsha narrate stories of princes like Kṛṣṇa and Balarāma studying under teachers such as Sandipani. Later accounts and inscriptions like Kadambari mention royal studenthood, while inscriptions and historical accounts under Kharvel reveal institutionalized learning for different varnas. Modern scholars, including M. Kane, have interpreted the practice and its variation, adding depth to our understanding of Brahmacharya in different eras. So, that was all about Brahmacharya, the first stage of student's life. We have learned the definition of Brahmacharya, Brahmacharin in Vedic literature, what are the dress codes which the students are supposed to follow, what is the relationship or how was the relationship between the teacher and the students, and we have also seen what were the duties which the students performed while completing his studies. We have seen different sources like Atharya, Aranyaka, Chandogya, Upanishad, Ṛgveda, Atharvaveda, Kadambari, and also sources related to Kharvel. We have also seen how the Vedic study declined among the other Varnas except the Brahmins, and how that became the reason for the upliftments of the Brahmanas in Vedic rituals. The Varna-based distinctions have also been studied properly, where we find different kinds of systems or code of conduct for students belonging from different Varnas. We have also seen how royal treatments or specialized education was given to the members of the royal family. So thank you for listening to me so patiently. Please support me so that I can bring brighter contents in future. In our next video, we are going to discuss about the next stage of Vedic life, that is Grihastha.